All right, everyone.
Here we are. James, that was a great start, mate. Why not? We love technology. And you know what, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We are back at the TechTownSquare. It is 8 p.m. Eastern. And today we are going to be discussing some incredible things. But before we get started, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, and comment. We want your comments. This is a town square. This is for us to discuss. And James, what's on the topic for today?
So, good evening, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world. The fact that the show is live makes it so that we're global, right? So, welcome to today's show. We're going to talk about something I think is very important in the world of technology, which is how do we reform journalism in the age of the internet and clickbait headlines, specifically going around the idea of retractions and mis and disinformation. And so this is going to be a very interesting topic because we're not really trying to cite what goes on from a journalistic point of view, but rather we want to address how do we as technologists address it. So we've got some people joining us live before we get started today. Hey, Spencer. Welcome. How's LA doing? Joel from North Carolina. Hello. Spencer says shalom. Shalom, Spencer. And the legendary Gilad Savion. Hey, from Miami. Welcome. Hello from Massachusetts. We are all over the place tonight, man. East Coast, West Coast. I love it. So we're talking about how do we reform journalism in the era of the internet. And I'm going to start off with a very quick statement here, and then we're going to commence into the debate. So here we go, kind of like my opening shot of this. Over the years, journalism had a level of integrity, a level of writing an article in a way or writing a story in a way where you were giving people information and you were allowing them to make a decision based on the information you were providing. In the onslaught of the internet, when the world came upon, we saw newspapers go bankrupt in the late 90s, early 2000s, and even into the mid 2000s of just a massive amount of newspapers that no longer could go into circulation because the internet just completely destroyed their business model. And so then that was before the rise of social media. Then came the rise of social media, and the rise of social media even went further in on the idea of journalism and reporting. And in came in the idea of clickbait, of generating this kind of discussion where the headline had to be so outrageous for someone to click it so that you can create revenue, that journalists no longer became journalists, what they were trained or studied to do, but rather they became digital marketing folks who were really focused on how do I write a story? How do I put it out very, very fast? And how do I get the most views on that story so that I still have a job? And we missed the idea of unbiased journalism, right? Mm-hmm. So, when we look back at the media over times, there was some bias. There's always been bias because humans are just generally biased human beings. But at the end of the day, how do we now come and reform journalism? Because what's happening today is people are stuck in these echo chambers, and these echo chambers only form one thought process or another. And by the way, this is very true in cyber, right? So, Eddie and I are both in cybersecurity. If you talk to cyber people, you think the biggest problem of cybersecurity is awareness and people not taking it seriously. But if you step outside of that and you step outside the echo chamber and you talk to others, you see something completely different. So with that, we're going to commence into debate. Eddie, before I pass this off to you, let's put up some comments, yeah?
Yeah, let's come up some comments. We've got lots of them coming in. Okay, let's have a look here.
Spencer talks about rainy and wet in California. So I'm very, very sorry. It's 70 degrees in Atlanta, Georgia.
That was when you were saying, how is everybody saying, that were quite a few comments ago. So we've got to get the context for the rest of the listeners.
Right.
Here.
So good laughs. Not anymore with journalistic
integrity you mentioned.
Yeah.
Right.
What is integrity and fake news? And we kind of want to address that because that's a buzzword. right? And we're going to talk a lot about that because we're going to talk about retractions today. So we're going to be addressing that. I missed the unbiased journalism, just stating the facts. I agree completely with Joel. What do you think of The Guardian and Epoch News? We'll get to that. Matt says, howdy, gentlemen. Hello, Matt. Confirmation bias is real. Absolutely. Daniel says, hey, James and Eddie. Hey, Daniel. So let's get into that. Eddie, what is your take on this?
So, it's kind of interesting because if you think back to when Ted Turner started CNN, so we're talking technology pre-internet, so cable TV. So all of a sudden, television comes right into your living room 24 hours a day. Ted Turner says, let's have a 24-hour news cycle. Now, I can imagine, and I'm speculating at this point, that he's thinking there's so much news in the world. Won't it be great to bring all this variety of news into one place on a 24-hour stream? Okay, but then there was a particular event. It was actually, unfortunately, it was a kidnapping. And this child had been kidnapped in the United States. This was in the 80s. And everybody was glued to their screen. And they kept that story on because eyeballs were glued to screens, ad revenues went through the roof, and then it snowballed from there. And so think O.J. Simpson trial, think Lady Diana or Princess Diana dying, Michael Jackson's death. These stories go on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so instead of getting a smorgasbord of a variety of international news and other news, what the industry served up is what people would gravitate toward. And unfortunately, it's gossip and it's excitement and celebrity and these kinds of things. So now come to the internet. See, I thought I was an English teacher back when the internet first started, right? I wasn't in technology back then. I just graduated from university. I was teaching English in Canada. The internet comes along and I started thinking, wow, as an educational tool, this is going to be incredible. And of course it is. Absolutely. We're so much better off for it. But what permeates the news of the internet? You get flat earth theory and pictures of people's food, right? On Instagram. I mean, these are the things that tend to make all the noise. And because of that, you now have to, as a news organization, you don't have to, but you do. Otherwise, you won't have revenue. You cater toward what the client needs. So what I do personally is I cut cable years ago. Like over a decade ago, I cut cable. I just thought it was so ridiculous. And so I subscribe to Stratfor, which is a paid news service. Now, this is not a plug for them. It's about $100 a year. It's dirt cheap. But because they have subscription base, they have no advertisers to please. Now, Stratfor specifically leans towards security, and that's my vocation, it's my interest, physical, cyber, global security. And so Stratfor leans in that direction, and they give you very factual, very unbiased news because guess what? All our guests are paying for this. You don't get that the same way in paying for the New York Times, because you still have advertising there. That payment is kind of nothing. What is it? $2 a month, $5 a month is obviously dirt cheap, but that is not covering their revenue. Their revenue model is covered through advertisers. So that's the problem right there that I think we need to potentially solve for. And when you and I were chatting, James, in the sort of preamble a couple of days ago on this, I came up with a kind of, actually, it was not an idea I came up with. I've heard it being kicked around before. So maybe we'll get to that in a few moments. But let's talk about some comments. Matt, faster media equals faster revenue and more sensationalism. Thank you. This is the problem. Flat Earth for life. Yeah, it's right? This is what you end up getting with the internet and with 24-hour news cycles. You get one story, OJ. Subjective journalism, yellow and one-sided most of the time, therefore less reliable. Yellow and one-sided? Or what do you mean there, Karen? Maybe you can expand on that one. Yeah, but subjective journalism, exactly.
So let's kind of address the idea of what Matt brought up here, which is faster media. For those watching right now, if you can give us a thumbs like or just comment if you've seen the movie Spotlight.
Right, brilliant movie set in Massachusetts, right? The Catholic priests who were abusing children and being moved around.
Right, Spotlight was the special magazine for the Boston Globe. It was their investigative journalism department.
Yeah,
and investigative journalism no longer exists. Right, Investigative journalism is not a thing anymore. Investigative journalism is now Twitter rumors or screenshots from training, and so forth. And so let's talk a little bit about the idea of investigative journalism. So it used to be that journalists were really kind of the advocates of finding out the bottom line truth. And a lot of the mistrust, so I'm going to quote a few different sources here on today's show, guys. And I just want to be crystal clear. We're not endorsing any of those sources. And one of our goals on the TechTownSquare is to really have a non-biased discussion around this, but a free non-biased discussion, meaning we can respect each other's point of views, but at the same time,
or to own and recognize our bias, because we have
correct.
bias.
We do. Confirmation bias is real. I mean, Matt said that a second ago.
Exactly.
Right. But so I did some research on this, and I've been doing a lot of research on this over time, because as a technologist and a person who's in cybersecurity and very interested in geopolitics, I feel the idea of news media and journalism kind of, I look at like CNN now, and CNN to me is not real journalism. CNN to me is just an opinion network.
It's entertainment.
Right? Yeah, it's entertainment. It's news entertainment. It's what it is. It goes on the same level of TMZ. Yeah. And one of the things I have in my notes here is the story of Kobe Bryant's death 14 months ago. So if you actually understand, if you actually seen the interview with Vanessa Bryant found out of the helicopter crash, not from the helicopter company or from the sheriff or from a spiritual guidance counselor or someone who would have showed up at her home to walk her through the very difficult news that her husband and one of her children had just died in a horrific helicopter crash. She found out through a TMZ notification on her phone.
It's brutal.
That is brutal. That is the problem with today. And TMZ, which considers itself kind of like news entertainment, like this category of news entertainment is horrible. Matt says she found out from Twitter. Yeah, she found out from Twitter, from the notification from TMZ tagging the fact that Kobe Bryant and his daughter had just crashed in a helicopter. So
what a bizarre world.
I mean literally no respect for the victims. Worse. So let's get into some of this stuff. So I want to kind of address this. So Corinne has identified that yellow equals gossip. Exactly. So gossip and one-sided. Yeah, it's true.
And Spencer makes you got it. Yeah, but you're brave of you. Thank you, Spencer. Exactly. It's politicized. It's about opinion. It's not news. It's opinion.
Right. So it used to be that you didn't know a journalist's political leaning because the journalist's political leanings were not relevant to what they did. Right. Yeah. They were covering a story. They had a level of journalistic integrity. Nowadays, you can go on a journalist's Twitter page and you can understand their bias very quickly by just looking at their Twitter profile. Right. Like how far to one side or the other are they? Right. Yeah. What's the hashtags they're using? What's the stuff they're retweeting and so forth? So Spencer brings up something. Why is there no investigative journalism anymore? So there's really, I think I've found one project, one group to really do investigative journalism, and that's Project Veritas. Right. Project Veritas are the only people that forced 335 retractions from journalists who misidentify. So journalists are covering investigative journalists, trying to discredit investigative journalists from doing the investigative journalism that they themselves will not do. It's a tongue twister. I know you guys love it. That's why you watch the show, right? Right. But Project Veritas has exposed, for the sake of all things, is James O'Keefe a conservative? It seems like it, right? But just so you guys know, there was a Republican operative in Texas who was ballot harvesting illegally, and Project Veritas investigated and exposed that person, and that person was charged thanks to their investigation. So they're not just, a lot of times the media tries to take away Project Veritas and say these guys are biased, but they're not really biased of that. Okay, so there isn't investigative journalism anymore because there's no money or time in investigative journalism, right? The fact is that people knew things that were happening were going on, but no one wanted to cover it because it didn't fit a specific narrative, and that's what news organizations do today. So if we going on is who's controlling the media. So advertisers control the media, the corporate overlords, and the owners, the shareholders do that, right? We know that to be true because the New York Times literally fired their COVID reporter in the middle of a pandemic for something he said 3 years ago that wasn't even in the context of what they say he did, but they said he lost the newsroom in his firing. So I call the New York Times the retraction times because these guys average about 22 retractions a week.
Now that's so I made a little statement over LinkedIn today to advertise our upcoming Tech Town Hall, and I basically said this: in what other job can you be wrong and not pay a consequence to it as far as retractions? Now, the weatherman, right? Obviously, joke. But that's super fascinating to me because I keynote speak for a living pretty much. And if I were to say something on stage that would be factually incorrect and damage the company, that would be the end of my career, never mind my job, right? So there's no penalty to this because they can print a retraction in the bottom of the newspaper and sort of hide it there. In fact, if you I tried DuckDuckGo and Google today, so try this after the call, ladies and gentlemen. Try Googling how many retractions from 2019 or 2020 did the New York Times or the Washington Post have. Very difficult to find that data. They're controlling that information.
So if you want to see how many retractions they do in a story, here's what they do is they'll post a story with a very misleading headline. And then they'll update it on the bottom. They'll say at the very bottom where no one goes, they'll say this story was updated to fix this, this, and this. Yeah. So if you look at like the New York Times or Fox News, right? So Michael here brings up Fox News. Fox News is also guilty of this. I know that people may not want to hear this, but Fox News on average issues about, I believe it's about 10 retractions a week. And Fox News had to issue a retraction over the Dominion thing because there was no proof, but they were promoting the Dominion propaganda post-election. And we have to address that. I mean, listen.
Put up Matt's comment, though. Go on, put it up.
This one?
That's the point.
Right?
But the damage is done because the headline is James is Godzilla. So yeah. This is what I mean about not paying the penalty when you can just say, retraction later, because everybody's now going to think James is Godzilla. Right. So Spencer brought up Project Veritas here. He marks them. I would encourage anyone to watch what Project Veritas does because they actually confront journalists with misleading headlines about Project Veritas. So Project Veritas, instead of doing investigative journalism of government overreach or corporate corruption, or different things, they've now become kind of like the standard. And by the way, we'll get to fact checkers in just a moment as well, because that's part of the agenda here. So Matt here brings up a great point. Let's not get into the causation of the binarism created by adversaries that understand war is an infinite game where we call our wars over by saying they took a wall down, we win. A little tangential story. Sorry. But yeah, I mean, we kind of in 89 when the Berlin Wall came down, people were like, communism is over. And we're like, no, communism has understood how to operate in the free market and leverage that. And we're seeing that now. They canceled Dr. Seuss this week. My God, they canceled Dr. Seuss. Who did?
The left. They canceled. Dr. Seuss is racist.
No, for crying out loud.
Mulberry Street.
Any other books
going down Mulberry Street teaches kids racism now. This is insane.
Yeah.
So what about government controlling media? That we see that in China, by the way, Spencer, right? Government controls media in China, in Russia, in Israel. They have a government censorship on what media can report from a national security perspective. Yeah. So there was, I mean, this kind of stuff.
Interesting question, though, because if news is beholden to the advertisers, and therefore gets bent, right? Then is it in the public good? If it's in the public good, then should it be funded? But as soon as it's going to get funded, it's funded by a left or a right-wing government entity. So that's a tautology. You can't escape from that one. Shmee the retraction times. Yeah.
Yeah. What is crap's what is crap? Oops, sorry. News is dangerous now. Spencer says there's no free speech. You have to look behind you while you speak now to see who is behind you. Yeah. There's the problem is, again, people kind of go to echo chamber. So I want to give, you know what? I'm going to share this tab here on the screen. This is a Pew kind of survey that was conducted in 2019, 2020, pre and post election. So let me just share my screen with this one, folks. So I'm going to pull this up here. There we go. Spencer, I'm going to remove your comment for just a moment and let me zoom in so you guys can actually see this. So the question here was, minorities of partisans constantly relied on news outlets whose audience lean their way politically. So a percentage of who for political and election news in at least 2 out of the 3 surveys between November of 19 and November of 2020 24% turned only to sources with right-leaning audience. This is from Republicans or leaning Republicans. 34% turned to sources with mixed or left-leaning audiences, and 41% didn't have either of these media diets consistently. So from the Democrat side, 48% turned to sources with mixed or right-leaning audiences, 25% turned to sources with left-leaning audiences only, and 27% didn't have either of these media outlets consistently. It's a very kind of interesting aspect, but if you look at Republicans and Democrats who consistently turned only to news outlets with like-minded audiences, you see that to be predominantly on the conservative side because they don't trust the other side of that, and that kind of goes there. But look at the liberal side as well. So the liberal side, the very liberal, only 2% turn to conservative, 28% turn to moderate. And again, this kind of goes into what you define as moderate, right? Right. And that's the very interesting aspect because I'll share a story, and then I want to get back to comments here because I think there's some really great comments coming through right now, and I want to address those. So my high school social studies teacher unfriended me on Facebook because I wouldn't accept fact checkers' idea of what makes a news publication right or left wing.
You wouldn't accept. Say that again.
So there's a fact checker that rates news outlets of whether they're very left, very right, conservative, liberal, center. So I shared a story on Facebook that was from what those sources consider to be a right-leaning website. And I was like, well, they're not really right-leaning. They're, the Epoch Times to me have some right articles, but this article has nothing but a vote in Congress about the sanctioning of or about anti-Semitism, and the fact that it was a resolution decrying anti-Semitism that was passed in Congress, and the Congress
and these teacher wouldn't accept that.
Well, so 34 Democratic congressmen voted against condemning anti-Semitism. And no major news media outlet covered this vote.
Yeah. But what's interesting about what you say there with Epoch Times is, maybe there's somebody on the right that everybody knows in media it's heavily left-leaning. But as soon as you get one or two on the right, people condemn it. So it is definitely, as Spencer says, free speech with a clause. Free speech as long as we agree with you. Right. And because the media heavily leans left, it's an unhealthy balance, whether you're left or right. You should be able to agree on that. And that's the clause for you. Karen made a great comment. That's very funny. So you've got to put that one up in a second.
We're going to put that up here in just a second. What happened to the paparazzi?
Yeah.
Well, because there's no longer paparazzi, it's news entertainment. And you have Twitter. You don't need paparazzi anymore. Hell, just go on Twitter.
Paparazzi was the TMZ, right? That was just TMZ people that chase Princess Diana around. Right. Now what we're saying is everybody's paparazzi, right?
Matt says, exactly. Sorry, I got paid by the letter. It is just news at scale. That is the issue, indeed. Let's get Corinne's comment here. It's really funny. The right took down ISIS and Soleimani, and the left took down Mr. Potato Head and Dr. Seuss. Yeah. Matt says, even the last statement is hyperbolism, indeed. Spencer loves Corinne's comment, but it's a very true statement. And Matt here brings up something that I think we can dig into and really have a very, very powerful debate on, is we are simply a very predictable populace with easy to play on a two-party system that makes left and right become really left and really right, combined with fast media and a really stupid populace searching for the first or most populist answers that validates the pre-notions that exist, hence easy to cause critical mass pointed at each end of the rope. That is absolutely, Matt, you nailed it on the head, sir. I applaud you for this comment. It's very thoughtful, it's eloquently written, and it's 100% accurate. We have become so sensationalized in echo chambers, and these echo chambers have created a sort of animosity where we can't come together. Or if coming together means, that we're in a very dangerous spot because of this. Because we now have to argue over the news sources that we come through. In the 60s, during the Cold War, we didn't have to argue that communism was bad. The debate wasn't that communism was bad. The debate was, how do you deal with bad communism? Right? Now we're dealing with the fact that, well, maybe some communism is good. We're randomly canceling things, and cancel culture has become something that's very, very scary. Spencer agrees with Matt's statement. Oh, the legendary Kim. Hey, Kim, thanks for watching. By the way, folks, Kim's got a radio program you guys have to tune into. One of the first cybersecurity dedicated radio programs that I think has a nationwide syndication, which is a really big win for our community. So Kim says, I think it's very sad that our country is going to a direction of only being bipartisan. Freedom of speech can harm your business or other issues of your life. Indeed, and that's where we as corporations, we as people within corporations, especially in the C-suite level, have to really fight this. And we've got to not let companies become intertwined in this bipartisan stuff and kind of really stay neutral.
I'm going to be a pessimist on this. I don't think that's going to happen, because the incoming generation, the indoctrination through universities, is bringing all those employees into these organizations. And I think for the organization, the lowest barrier is to not fight it and just put up some sign. Yes, we love everybody, right? You see the lawn signs, there's signal virtualing lawn signs all over people's yards. We believe science is real, blah, 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 right? So as a corporation, it's so easy. Just throw up the sign. They don't believe it. I don't think people in these corporations could care less, right? Except that there is a bit of pressure from the masses within their organizations that they have to keep happy. So put up the sign. Why bother fighting it? So I'm a bit of a pessimist on that one. Yeah.
Matt says self sometimes included in stupid polis data sets. Spencer goes, what is news for today? But it is so global, coming from many opinions. So here's where we get into the problem of journalism. So let's pull out the elephant in the room. Are you ready for this one? I'm gonna say it. Are you guys ready? Here it goes. Bloggers. I'll explain. Remember the what's its name, the story that was really populated about the kids from the Christian school that CNN ended up having to settle, and the New York Times had to settle. They paid multi-million-dollar settlements to that kid for really misrepresenting the story, right? I forgot the name of the it was the Christian school, Washington D.C. thing. These guys were on a school trip. They were wearing MAGA hats. A Native American guy was like playing the drum.
That young fella. Yeah. That's right.
I forgot the name of that.
Yeah.
But here's the deal. Here's why bloggers brought this upon. Here's why blogs brought this in. Okay, so private blogs. So CNN, New York Times, Washington Post all got this story wrong. They misrepresented the facts. They knowingly misrepresented the facts. It was proven in depositions. They all had to settle. They all paid this Covington. It's the Covington school kid story. All right. Now I'm going to use that. I've got one where also Fox and we're seeing this right now going on with Dominion. Dominion has sued Rudy Giuliani. They've sued a bunch of people who've misrepresented them in court. And those lawsuits, by the way, are all going to get settled. Just so you know, like Fox and OAN and Giuliani and others are going to have to settle those. That's never going to make it to trial. Okay. But news organizations can be held liable for misrepresenting data, right? So when they issue a retraction, if they issue a timely retraction, they may not get, so like the lawsuit comes and then they settle for an X amount of dollars. But the challenge with that is that by the time it's settled, the headline's already on Twitter. It's been shared 200,000 times.
Right. Yeah.
But bloggers really destroyed this because bloggers, you can't sue a blogger. It's my free speech right to write whatever I want on the internet. Like on this show, it's your free speech right to come out here and say, James, you're an idiot.
Oh, God.
I don't agree with you, right? And that's okay. That's your free speech right to do that. Okay, but what bloggers did is bloggers became, started this echo chamber before social media, and then they got really, they started really kind of grabbing social media attention as bloggers. Think of like Tim Pool and the Daily Wire and a lot of these people who start like Ben Shapiro, who started as bloggers. Tim Pool started as a blogger, then went on to work for like Axios and a bunch of different, but these guys weren't journalists. They weren't trained to be journalists. Now you're just a blogger, right?
Right.
So this is where I think
right versus right viewpoints. That's fantastic. It's right versus right viewpoints. And to me, the tragedy in this is the fact that there is objective truth. There is reality. There's an old Soviet proverb that goes something like this: when nothing is real, anything is possible. That's a great statement, right? When nothing is real, anything is possible. So there is objective truth. And the tragedy in all this is that we don't seem to agree that there even is objective truth. Not what the truth is, but that there is objective truth. This is how far I think the pendulum has swung on this thing. I'm a little bit of a fan of an author called Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She wrote a book called Infidel and a couple of others. Yeah, you're right then. Yeah, I know. I think you're right about how fast does the next sign come. That was when I was referring, Matt, and I'll finish my Ayaan Hirsi Ali. We got some time. We've got 25 minutes. Matt made that comment when I said, about throwing up the lawn signs. I know, but I think the lowest barrier is for corporations to just throw up another sign. I don't think people truly, you have to do with sexual harassment trainings. You have to, and some companies enforce critical race theory and all these kinds of things. And what expense is it of the organization to just throw this into the learning management system and just say, hey, check, leave me alone, social justice warriors. I've got the training. So I think I think the barrier to entry there is super low for them. Eric, thank you for joining us. Web journaling, or do you mean bloggers? What did you mean there?
I mean bloggers. I mean like amateur people who blog about news or try to feel like they're informing people without the without the journalistic kind of and people are going to laugh at me for saying this, without the journalistic oath of integrity, which used to exist, which may not exist today, simply because newsrooms are ran based on trends and not based on the truth. And what's very funny is some newsrooms consider themselves to be very truthful, and I have some friends in media, and without throwing them under the bus, I will say the following. A lot of them say the newsroom and the stories that they pursue have to fit a specific click narrative. So like if Project Veritas exposed CNN's daily calls leading up to the election, by the way, they have an entire archive on their website. And if you listen to those CNN like stand-up calls, those daily stand-up meetings that they were listening and recording, you see that they're talking about, we got a big online bump from this story, so we're going to keep pushing this narrative on. And you're like, but it's a non-story. Why are you making it a story?
The problem is no one knows about Project Veritas, right? The populace isn't there. The populace are glued to CNN, Fox, CNBC, and the such like. So it's good that they're there, but they need to have their message amplified. And this is, we'll keep going with these comments, but I want to start taking the conversation in the direction of solution. What can we do? Right, so just start to think about that, audience, please. We'd love to hear your comments on it. I've got a couple of ideas. Let's get through these. Matt says, I can eloquently lead people down the wrong path on purpose and profit from it. Right. I am blogging now.
Right, I've got a website. I'm blogging. I can write whatever I want. Right, Matt goes on to say, it's the absolute truth. Just choose to ignore points and call it objective. Indeed. Spencer says, back in the day, news would inform people on what's going on in the area. Today, what news is being reported or what is focused? By the way, I see the fact today that national news is pretty much going to die. But what's really should be the next big thing, I think, is going to be local news stations who are about to die, who I think can make a revamp now, because local news reporters can actually really come through on this one, and we'll get to that here in just a minute. In sales, we call it closing the gates. Eric here has a wonderful comment. Well, blogs, so-called the word mashup of weblog, started as a paradigm of tracking observations from people's journey of discovery on the new World Wide Web. You're right, and now it's become a everyone puts out a blog. I'm starting to write stuff on Substack, right? And not promoting anything. I've been working on my first 2 or 3 articles, and I plan to post them simultaneously so you guys can actually read them, because it's a 3-part series on foreign policy, cybersecurity, and global media. And one of the ideas that I kind of talk about in those stories is beyond blogging, I leave myself out there to understand that what I don't know, I don't write. And if I'm not sure, I write it clearly. And I encourage people to fact check me and prove me wrong. I want that done. That's why I do this. That's why we do this show, by the way, is if you've got a different idea, let us know. I want to get to Max's comment here in just a minute, but Eric, in a live reply, let's get this done. New users to the community transformed that journaling, the original, into an information source. That's where that is where it went off the rails. Commoditization of information, the first step into commercialization of thought bubbles. Yeah, that is that is very true. And the fact that Facebook and YouTube let you monetize this stuff and let you put out this content. So in one way, I'll tell you an interesting story and experience I just had with YouTube. So I do another show. I actually did it a little while ago. I did it at 2 a.m. this morning, called The Other Side of Cyber. And last week we did our show on COVID vaccine scams. And YouTube took down our show. We appealed it, we won. Then YouTube took it down again, and then we lost the second appeal. Because they said we were spreading medical misinformation, when what we were talking about was how cyber criminals are taking advantage of the populace with COVID-19 scams, vaccine scams, of making people pay for it. So apparently for YouTube, it's okay for people to fall victim for that. Max Garcia says, how do we determine what is truth? This is becoming more difficult. Well, we have to agree on a unique set of facts. And right now we can't get to that because facts and words and definitions are being changed at such speed. I mean, we're in an era of digital book burning, where if you don't buy a hard copy of the book and you've got it on your Kindle and Amazon decides that they no longer want to have that book listed, it's deleted from your Kindle.
Well, this is what I mean about, we can't even decide that there is objective truth. The first thing we can do is go back to that and then build from there. You mentioned local news stations. I agree. I remember a few years ago, I was living overseas, and a fuel truck had toppled over on a road. It was about a mile from a river, and a local reporter turned up real quick. It was a fairly big scene, right? It was an accident, the fuel couple tripled over, and of course there was gasoline that had sort of rolled into the grass there. Now, the local reporter said, gasoline soon pouring into your local water supply, right? And everyone, big panic. But because it was local news, it was very easy for a couple of thousand people that lived real locally, and I lived 5 minutes from here, to quickly rush down and have a look and go, I think it's a complete and utter lie, right? This is just not true. That's where I think you have a little bit of control from people who will point out the lie. And what's interesting about bloggers, there is another side to it, because bloggers can get up there and say, hey, CNN, right? You just printed something that was inaccurate. So the question is, how do we then turn these clickbait bloggers around for the good, perhaps? And Max is saying, just like strong relationships are built on trust, we need tools, processes, and validation systems to assist. I wonder if blockchain would be able to help out with this kind of stuff, right?
That's where I think people overestimate blockchain. It's become a buzzword.
Right.
We'll get to that there in just a minute. Miguel says hello. Hey, Miguel, we have a solution from Eric, so I love it. So first, codify the problem. Second, develop a framework that identifies real addressable sewer pipe issues. Third, defining the goal is concluded. Replace. Fourth, strategically develop and implement a replacement that doesn't foster the same problems. Make sense? That's why I wanted to do this talk with cybersecurity professionals. Eric Williams, my friend, you've just developed a framework to how do we fix news media. And bring back the integrity of. Listen, I believe, and I want to say this. This is my I believe statement here. Okay. I believe that 90% of journalists that are working in places today want to do actual journalism, but they understand that if they do actual journalism against what the company perceives it, meaning the mob that controls the company, they're not going to have a job. Look at Glenn Greenwald. Right, Glenn Greenwald, who's a guy who I don't agree with on a lot of things, but he's a journalist. Glenn Greenwald, to me, is an actual journalist. Right. So, Eric, you just brought up a great point here. I am going to use this comment in highlighting this episode. If that's okay with you, just give me a thumbs up, Eric. I will quote you on it.
And as far as technology goes, something so we said at the beginning of the show that because advertisers are basically you want eyeballs on the screen, so whatever sells is the O.J. Simpson trial. So let's go. That's the only thing that's happening in the world. So that's eyeballs on screen. Now, to get away from that in the days of the internet, you know how you want to somebody sends you a link to a New York Times article or a Harvard Business Review article, and you've got to subscribe, and it just irritates me because it's like, now I've got to subscribe. I don't want to subscribe. It's not about the $5 a month, obviously. It's about the fact that now I've got to give my email address. I've got to go through this whole subscription thing. And then I end up trashing the whole, I don't even bother with the article. So there's lost revenue potential for the New York Times. Here's how you can solve that. If James is going to send me an article and I see on here, I want to be able to just hit a button and go click, click. And for 20 cents, I'll read this article. Because I think journalists should be paid, right? Somebody's done research. They've worked hard to come up with what they think is an objective truth about something. I think they should be paid for that. So I'm happy to pay them, but I don't want to have to subscribe to the entire New York Times. So why can't I just have a click, click, I'll read that article now. And imagine that, 20 cents multiplied by millions of people. Does that help them out financially? Somebody needs to cost model that one.
So the problem with that is that the internet's been loaded with free content and people expect free, right? So the way to leverage that is through advertising. Now, one way to reform that is to create, like you said, a kind of like iTunes model for news stories, right? Which, by the way, like Apple News tried. For those who have Apple, you got the Apple News app, and they've got the Apple News Plus, and the Apple News Plus brings you all paid stories into your
right.
Yeah, you subscribe. It's like $10 a month, but it'll bring you any locked story, even if it's behind the paywall. You get it for free there. So Apple's already kind of trying to play around with that. We'll see how that works. My challenge with the Apple News app right now is even though I've said I don't want to get news from CNN, I still get news from CNN. So we'll get to that in just a minute here. Eric says there's no AI model for determining truth, only for confidence derived from data lake elements. That's true. Matt agrees with me. No, on blockchain, I kind of agree with that. Spencer asks, where do you start with Eric's framework theory? So you kind of start with agreeing that what are the baseline truth that are actual facts. So you go and you say, well, I get feelings, I get progress, I get all those things, but let's all agree that the Constitution is a fact. We're not going to uproot it. Now, let's say what things are really kind of are truth backed by the Constitution, meaning what is equality, what is freedom of speech, what is freedom of the press, and then let's hold those truth, which, takes us back 10, 12 years, and we can all start that and say, like, all right, the 2005 truth are the 2005 truth, and let's start from 2005 because that's where the system starts to get broken. That's the beginning of social media, right?
This reminds me, you mentioned with the Constitution, it reminds me of that Project 1619 in the New York Times.
The 1619 Project, yeah.
Yeah, 1619 Project. What was the basis of that again in 30
The
seconds?
1619 Project was a project done by the New York Times that essentially says the United States was not established in 1776, that it started in 1619 with the first bringing on of slaves to the United States, and that the United States was inherently racist at the time, and that the establishment of the U.S. was really in 1619 and not in 1776. That's, by the way, the 1619 Project has been redacted and retracted and re-edited over 150 times since it's been published.
Really?
Just so you know. And they've rewritten entire parts of the 1619 Project because it's been factually proven to be false.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's like, well, 1776, it was War of Independence, right? So surely that's just a good date to establish a birthday, right? July 4th, 1776. And so it almost seems like there's an ulterior motive to say, well, actually, that's not the birthday. The birthday is another day. Why not leave that birthday there and simply talk about the other issues in the historical record of the United States? So I don't actually think that people are, the integrity of people wanting to establish fact is more about them wanting to establish an agenda, right, rather than fact. Great point. I'm not sure, I can't remember which one it was, but economics. Oh yes, yeah, exactly, Spencer. The internet destroyed the ability to get paid like the music industry. Yeah. Exactly. And we're still growing through that. That's what this conversation is about.
No content. Eric says no content is free. When it's free, it's because you, the consumer, are the product. That is very true.
Eric, I'll give you a great one. That's a good one. And this is what I say when people complain about that. I like to say it's like the cow complaining how the steak gets served, right? We're the cow. Exactly. Yeah. We're the product. Yeah.
Matt says, I feel like your argument is in direct opposition to your earlier subscription advocation in general. I don't think subscribing to the Wall Street Journal or Paper Times, whatever, will change the equation. And this is where I think, Matt, you and I can actually have a very fruitful debate. So I'll tell you why I think that the model that's going on right now is you subscribe and you support publications that give you not what you want to hear, but give you a little bit more of a balance. So we're seeing that kind of go on over the last 2 or 3 years or so, where more and more people have developed that subscription model where subscribe, read what I do, say what I do. I'll bet, we're going to give you what we consider to be the truth, and you're in an echo chamber. I honestly think that if you go to these newspapers and you say, you used to sell a newspaper, print subscription for, $20 a month, I think, or $20 a year or whatever it was. And you tell them, hey, would you charge someone $20 a year, but go back to really doing actual journalism? And that would be the kind of equation there is you have to go back to doing journalism, no more narrative stuff, no more political stuff, but actually doing journalism, no more clickbait. You might win that.
You're also talking about when I mentioned Stratfor. So, Stratfor is a specific news based on security. So that's my leaning, right? Because it helps me with my profession. It also doesn't advertise at all. So I'm happy to select that one. It's obviously a little bit more expensive than newspapers or online newspapers that also have advertising, like the New York Times, but it has zero advertising. So what I like about that is they are not catering to any advertiser. There's never going to be a story in which they think, oh, I better not throw that out there because this pile of money isn't going to influence, right, the story. And we see this in movies all the time. So like in the Doctor Strange movie, they changed an entire character's ethnicity from Chinese to something else because they wanted to make sure that this movie ran well in China. Now, look, that's a fine economic decision, right? You be upfront about it, change the story, and this is why we did it. But the deception that goes around it is kind of interesting to me because it's almost as though people, certainly in this movie example, are trying to say, no, we didn't do that. We've got complete integrity of the story. Why not just say, actually, we didn't want to offend this massive audience in China. It's massive revenue for us. So we changed this character. I actually don't think too many people would mind in that regard.
Well, it's like the new Mulan movie by Disney, right? It was recorded and they thanked the government where they have the concentration camps for the Uyghur Muslims.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just like, say it then. If you're going to make this decision, say it. Matt says, anchoring truths and their change over time is epic. Anchoring truths and their change over time?
When I was talking about the 2005 truth and how they change it over time, how truth changes over time, Max here answering a question from Miguel says, I think truth validation needs to be decentralized, similar to how Wikipedia governs itself, and over time truth and reality change to human physique. Yeah, so that's a very interesting point because Wikipedia has been also beat over the head a little bit over the idea that they allow people to change things on specific Wikipedia entries to really distort the entire to distort the story and some of the facts that go along with it. Wikipedia is actually in a very interesting situation right now. There's a lot of heat on Wikipedia on that. It's also like, because what's happening is there's significant kind of stuff that's going on there. I don't want to get into that today, but we can definitely do an entire TechTownSquare on, is Wikipedia really the new encyclopedia of truth and fact, or is it not?
It's great, though, specific to what I was saying. So that's interesting, It's been tried. The actual actionable approach to fact management and consumption is not subscribers or consumers. It is to foster the development of an objective vetting pipeline, a sort of UL. What does UL mean? Approved content. That is a new word for me, Eric, at the end there. Imprimatur. I'm gonna have to Google that one in a second. You have to, Eric, this is really cool, man. It's very profound. So you're right, a vetting pipeline. What might that look like? If your fingers are fast enough, my friend, please type it out. James, what does he mean by UL? UL approved. This is
so a lot of communication devices or batteries or different things are like UL approved. It's kind of like a standard, right? Okay. So UL is kind of like a standard for batteries, for communications, for a lot of different things. So UL approved content imprimatur is kind of like the idea that this has been checked by an independent lab and it passes all the standards. So the idea is that you have to create some sort of standard here, right? And that's very hard to do when forget politics for a second, forget Democrat, Republican, but when the points of view are so far apart that it creates that. Matt here says, you do and I do. I feel that most subscribe to the truth that is an echo chamber. I agree, Matt. I think that's the problem, right? We subscribe to a truth that's an echo chamber that supports our narrative. And then if they say something that doesn't really, if they all of a sudden turn back on a narrative or something that we believe to be true, we saw that with Fox News, right? In the election when they called Arizona and people were like, oh my God, Fox News, you guys screwed up. We're never going to watch Fox News again. And you're like, even if you can't just go out, you gotta kind of have to understand what they said. And people were really trying to kind of bring that up, and I think that's really significant. But that is Matt says, but that is a game theory thought that a player can go tell these companies to reset. I don't see that actually happening across the stakeholder shareholder fight that exists and causes most companies to vector, if you will. So here's the thing. These capitalistic companies are playing to specific trends. right? So what happens is they don't really bow down, but what they end up doing is they go, could we make a boost of money out of this? And they go, could we? All right, let's do it. Because they understand that the downside of it is we can recover later from it, right? We saw this with kind of like the NFL and NBA, right? Kind of, Mark Cuban saying, we're not going to play the national anthem, and the NBA going like, yeah, you are. You're definitely playing the national anthem, right? So this idea that, we're kind of going to serve to get a boost of revenue and get all these people that kind of are very active, and our marketing department shows that these people spend money on this kind of stuff, and we're going to go and play to that, and capitalism wins every time, and eventually there's a fix. Eventually this stuff, capitalism, the market fixes itself. Eric here also goes, any underwriter of facts has to be sanctioned broadly and audited, of course, and only then can it be offered. The inherent problem is that the problem of underwriting slows the trajectory of information dissemination. It does, but here's the thing about the freedom of information and the idea of a free press, right? So let's first of all define what makes press.
Right. Define what makes press.
Define what makes press. And then identify the press for what it is, and then hold them legally accountable for what it is. So I honestly believe that the less regulation, the more businesses tend to kind of come into play, right? So if you essentially say, you're not covered, if you're not press, you're not covered under, or you're going to, if you're define yourself as press, if you use the word journalism or press or blog or anything, like if we update the terminology to existing laws and you hold people accountable, they're going to be less likely to write this kind of stuff. And again, in the world of freedom and the democracies and the balances of things tend to balance themselves, because when someone does something so egregious, that's so false, that they're sued so bad that they're out of business.
Yeah, and it actually begs the question of this, and we're coming up on time, so I'll make this as sort of my closing thought, because I think there is an area as individuals where we can participate to push back against this very problem that we're talking about right now. So I was the guest on a podcast in Norway earlier this week, and before the podcast got started, and I'm just not used to the way they do it there, I guess, but before it got started, the podcast host was saying, now, Eddie, listen, we're going to record it, and if you say anything that you don't want in there, don't worry, we'll edit it out. And I stood back and said, no, I said, don't edit it at all. If I say something that I later think is stupid, I want the opportunity to come back on your show and discuss that. If it's worthy of an apology, apologize, but that's not really the point. The point is, Alain de Botton, who's a British philosopher, he said this: if you're not just slightly embarrassed about who you were last year, you're not growing. And it's a great statement, because now we're at the place where, you see people with an axe to grind that keep hold of tweets where somebody might have said something derogatory in high school, and then later they're going to go to a university and this thing comes out in public. So that we need to move away from, and we need to give people the opportunity to say, oh yeah, I kind of screwed up on that sentence back there. That was, I don't think that anymore. I mean, I certainly don't think the same thing as I thought when I was in my 20s, right? So I think we can be, if we start to become okay with this ourselves and perhaps shrug off those that might wag their finger at us, then maybe the news organizations might end up being a bit truthful themselves over time.
Absolutely. So I want to get to the last comments, and then before we end, I want to do a few announcements. So let's do this. Matt Lee says, Eric Williams and is subject to its own corruption. That is also very true. And then Eric kind of responds to that. We're talking about facts, not the interpretation of facts. There has to be a fact basis that is sanctioned regardless of point of view. We need an arbiter for facts so that an opinion and interpretation is plain and divorced from the swirl of opinion. Self-improvement is ongoing and a lifetime endeavor. Absolutely true. So a few announcements. One is we're going to start bringing guests on the show. So if you're interested in being part of a discussion, reach out to me or Eddie on LinkedIn. We'd love to have you on. Number two, we're moving. If we're not moving, but we're also going to be doing a Clubhouse only room for the TechTownSquare. If you're not on Clubhouse and you want to be on Clubhouse, message me or Eddie. We have invites still for Clubhouse. We can get you on. We're probably going to start to do something post show, meaning we're going to get offline here maybe and do another half hour with a guest on Clubhouse, where people can actually talk freely. And it's not recorded. And so that way, I know that a lot of times people are very mindful of what they say on social media because it can have an impact on your career and your brand. So this will take us kind of into a place where we can have a bit more of an honest and back and forth discussion beyond just writing, but actually in audio. We're also probably going to do something on Friday afternoons, kind of like a TechTownSquare. Take your scotch and cigar and let's ride off into the weekend and talk about this week and stuff like that. So if you're not on Clubhouse and you want to follow us on Clubhouse, Max, I'll get you your Clubhouse invite, buddy. I'll message you and get you a Clubhouse invite, Max. Is going to be really cool. We're going to start doing this stuff on Clubhouse. We'll start opening some rooms and scheduling this stuff out. You can follow me on Clubhouse at James Azar if you're already there. Just look me up, follow me there. I do a room at 6 a.m. on Monday mornings with my friends over in Australia, Vegemite on Toast, and Talk Nerdy Timmy. We talk a lot of cyber. So I have several of those rooms, and we'll be doing a bunch of TechTownSquare stuff on there as well. So join us there. I want to get to Max's comment here as well, which is I think our constitutional right of free speech and press and speech is flawed. It never says anything about it must be truth. Just like politicians can campaign and speak lies, and there's no repercussions. We humans are still evolving. That is an excellent point, Max. Politicians campaign and speak lies all the time, and they're not held accountable, partially because the free press doesn't hold them accountable to it if it fits a specific narrative or piece of that, which is also problematic of within itself. Is anything said on here dangerous to our brand? Not really. I mean, we're talking very freely and people know what the show's all about. Again, some stuff is up for some stuff is up for interpretation, but everything that we've said here today is very it's proper debate, and it's what debate was all about. It's how if you read the Federalist Papers, what we're talking about right here is essentially what's in the Federalist Papers. As we wrap up, Eric says, what is Clubhouse? What's Clubhouse? Is that like Gopher? LOL. It's the new and outstanding app for communication, audio only, no recording, no nothing. Very, very cool. And Evan, what's up, buddy? Talk nerdy to me, man. I love it. I love it too. Talk nerdy to me, baby, is kind of how I start every talk nerdy session I administer, and people love it. The accountability of political actors is the ballot. It is very, very true. So that is also there. And Miguel says, I'm following you now at Clubhouse. That's awesome. Thank you, Miguel.
Me too. It's Eddie Doyle, I think. I got the app, but I haven't used it yet. We're going to be using it as of next week. So to reiterate, it'll be the same session as this. So 8 p.m. Eastern, we will continue with this format. We will be streaming. And after the stream, we'll all get together. It's kind of like this, right? You've been at work, you're working hard, and now we're going to pile out to the bar. We're going to get our scotch and cigars, get on Clubhouse, and then just hash out some more details and finish off the day. So that's what we're looking to do as of next week.
Indeed. So that's it for us here this week, folks. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all your comments.
Really cool.
And feedback. You guys are awesome. You guys are really the best audience on the planet. And Eric says, finally, I do know what Clubhouse is, LOL. I knew you do, Eric, but still, man, you know.
Imprimatur, he knows what Clubhouse is. That's a
he does know what Clubhouse is. So guys, we're signing off for tonight. Thank you so much. And Kim here with one last comment. You guys are great. Thank you for all you guys are doing. Thank you, Kim, for everything you do as well. Kim, definitely a trailblazer in cybersecurity, folks. So that's it for us here, guys. Signing off. Enjoy the rest of your evening and stay cyber safe.
Bye-bye.